This is Donald Parham. You're listening to Chargers Unleashed, part of the LA Football Network. Stay jiggy.
Hey, this is Chris from the 2nd, Chargers outside linebacker, and make sure you check out Chargers Unleashed.
Shout out to Chargers Unleashed, Sebastian Joseph Day, you know the vibes, we outside.
You checking in with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, and you're tuning in to Chargers Unleashed.
You're listening to the Chargers Unleashed podcast with your host, Dan Wolkenstein and Jake Hefner.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner again, this time on the LA Football Network. Today's show, of course, being brought to you by BetOnline, Charger Bolt Family, and Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. And if this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, as Kevin Costner once famously said in Draft Day, say it with me.
It's been two bare naked ladies.
In 2 weeks.
Two bare naked ladies. Right? Is that how it works? Do you get the reference?
Yes, I get it what it is. Yes. You said that same thing last year.
And the year before, and the year before, and the year
which is why I remember, when you first mentioned that 3 years ago, I didn't have one fucking clue what you said.
It's been one. Yeah. Anyways, Jake, how are you, my friend?
I'm just trying to pass the time.
All right, well, we're going to try to pass the time well today. Fun episode. We're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, although I'll stay a little bit on brand for NFL Draft. But this time, we're going to focus on the 2022 NFL Draft and look at which sophomore Los Angeles Chargers need to step up the most in order for this Chargers team to succeed in 2023. Lots to get into. This is a fun episode. Before we get into that, Jake, over or under? Let's pick. I'm going to go over under 3.5 games played by a one JT Woods in 2023.
Let's just say for Tom Telesco's sake, it better be over 3.5. Let's say that much.
What are you taking?
I'll say that I'll be optimistic and I'll say the over.
All right. Good season for JT Woods coming, or at least improved season, I should say.
Hopefully.
Okay.
But anyways, before we get into things, I want to remind you guys real quick that BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season. Always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends over at BetOnline. So head on over to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use that promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your rewards. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So I think, Jake, we got to start this thing off before we even talk about the players. Before we go any further, for folks who have not seen it, go check out social media on Chargers Unleashed. You can see it on Instagram, Facebook, as well as on Twitter. We've got a giveaway coming up here the day before the draft. The Slayer himself, Keenan Allen, powder blue, signed custom Los Angeles Chargers jersey. All you got to do is follow us on social and subscribe on YouTube, and then show a screenshot. That's all you got to do to win or to earn a chance to win a signed Keenan Allen custom jersey, powder blue. Jake, so who steps up in year two? This is an interesting discussion. When you go back and look at this 2022 draft class, remember, in your round one, you went and got Zion Johnson. Round two, you got Khalil Mack, i.e. basically traded for Khalil Mack. Round three, JT Woods. Round four, Isaiah Spiller. Round five, Otito Ogbonnia. Then Jamaree Salyer, Jazeer Taylor, Deane Leanard, and Zander Horvath. Now, again, I want to preface this, and we're going to be specific here. Which sophomore Chargers need to step up the most in order for this team to be successful in 2023? Step up is the key word. So I would say there's a few here that I think are not necessarily as important as others, but we're going to get into it. I think, for example, Zander Horvath. I think he can improve year over year. I don't necessarily think that they need him to step up for this team to succeed in 2023. In my opinion, Jamaree Salyer now in his essential rookie year as a guard in the NFL. We haven't seen that. Gonna need to step up. So as we go through these, just kind of use that as a, I don't know, as a, what's the word I'm looking for, Jake? Use it as a parameter. Barometer. There you go. Parameter, barometer. Jake, so 2 years for these players now. What are your thoughts on this draft class last year? They hit on Zion Johnson.
I expected more. And the best way to probably describe this draft class right now is kind of as an incomplete, because we all loved the round 1 selection of Zion Johnson leading up to the draft, probably at that 2-week mark before everything went down. This is where the biggest focus to really hone in on that became for the Chargers, that really kind of got the sense like, okay, if he's there, because of the tackles that were probably going to be off the board at that point in time, it felt realistic that the Chargers were going to go Zion Johnson. And thankfully they did, because there was that right tackle that nobody wanted from the Chargers standpoint.
Rhymes with Schmever Schmenning.
Yes. And it was between him and Zion Johnson. And I know that we were at my draft party last year, and there was a whole slew of us just kind of like, oh,
our heart skipped a beat.
Please just do the right thing.
We were all doing like the Ricky Bobby, just like, dear Jesus.
I'm sure myself, as well as collective Chargers fans everywhere, were doing the exact same thing. And thankfully, they made the right selection. And then you really had to wait. And like, this is why, Dan, I hate trading picks. I don't even care for the fact that it was for Khalil Mack last year, because to watch the talent that went off the board in the second round, and then ultimately what you ended up selecting in the third round, felt pretty damn sour.
Were any of them as good as Khalil Mack? Any? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no?
You could have found somebody in round 2 that could have contributed to the level of Khalil Mack, in my opinion. How about draft a damn receiver so you weren't in the mess that you're currently in right now?
But again, all the receivers early on, we saw, remember, that was the year that like all the receivers went. But regardless, hindsight 2020.
I get
Khalil Mack was a stud. He literally, if we didn't have him last year, there was no edge presence at all.
I'm not taking away the contributions of Khalil Mack. I'm just saying in general, I get it.
Jake's coming out with hot takes, man. This is wild.
Khalil Mack probably could have had a better year had Joey Bosa been able to stay healthy last year.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's admit that. But Khalil Mack was really the only edge rushing presence that you had for a good majority of the year. But yes, this is why I hate trading away draft capital, because you have to sit. And then when you don't end up capitalizing on round 3, you look at day 2 of the draft for the Chargers, and it really felt like a swing and a miss initially with the selection of JT Woods, because he was barely utilized, and people knew that when he was selected that he was going to be a project, a common term in the Tom Telesco area, project. So that felt kind of sour. And then you went to day 3, and the Chargers start that off by selecting Isaiah Spiller. And a lot of people, because of where Isaiah Spiller was rated last year, they felt like, okay, we know that the need that Austin Eckler needed the year before that he really needed someone to step up in that running back stable. You thought for sure that Isaiah Spiller was going to be slotted as your number 2 back.
Crickets.
Long pause for effect there for that very reason, because for some reason or another, Sony Michel, Larry Roundtree, Joshua Kelly, apparently, according to coaches, were beating out Isaiah Spiller in practice enough for the standpoint that we barely saw Isaiah Spiller on the field last year. So that was a little bit of a disappointment. And it heads into this year with the Chargers now having questions again about their running back stable. Tom Telesco has now spent the last 3 years in selecting a running back. Roundtree, Kelly, Spiller. Is he about to make it number 4 in a row that he is going to select a running back? Then you move on to round 5. One of the better value picks that the Chargers were able to get in UCLA's Otito Ogbonnia. Unfortunately, went down with a torn ACL that he suffered at the midpoint of the year. And again, the Chargers' run defense was pretty much already not performing well out of the gate. but it didn't help matters when Tito ended up going down, because he was. I thought he performed very admirably for a rotational rookie along that defensive line with that talent that they had. And I'm excited to see what year 2 is going to be, and we'll get into that in a second. And then talk about value once again. You come around with Jamaree Salyer, who pretty much, let's not sugarcoat it, saved your season as far as the protection for Justin Herbert goes, and for what he was able to do and stepping in after Rashawn Slater goes down with a season-ending injury. Come back again, round 6, Jamaree Salyer, who came on late in the year. You didn't see too much of him early in the season. Deane Leanard was pretty much relegated to special teams. And then finally in round 7, Zander Horvath, because they needed a fullback in that system. Everybody thought, hey, this was great in the first 2 weeks because he put touchdowns in the end zone the first 2 weeks. And then virtually, poof, was never heard from again. So it kind of does feel incomplete. And they're, like you said, Dan, the need necessity for stepping up in year 2 is how we're grading this. In a way, you could feel like a lot of these guys, because of the performance in 2022 or lack of playing time in 2022, that every single one of them could step up. But we're talking about the ones that really need to step up. So we could start in cascading order here, going all the way back to Zion Johnson. And I think this is important to bring this one up, because obviously we're not saying that Zion Johnson by any means played poorly in his rookie season, because that's not true. But now from the standpoint that he is going to be switching from right guard to left guard, pairing him with Rashawn Slater can only make him better. Rashawn Slater on his left, Corey Linsley's to his right. That's pretty nice to be a middleman in that part of the offensive line. But even how he scored, Dan, scored very well as a run blocker in his rookie season. I thought even his pass rushing grade wasn't bad, wasn't the best, but it wasn't terrible. And I think just from him coming out the way he looked as a rookie, and now inserting him next to Rashawn Slater, is only going to make him better. But as much turnaround as there has been on this offensive line, you finally feel like you have a stable of 5 as your best guys moving forward that are going to be able to keep your quarterback upright.
Which, sidebar, I hope it turns into like stable of 7. Like, they need to keep it more than 5. But I digress. I define as step up as someone who you either did not see much of or at all last year that needs to wildly improve, or someone who maybe switched positions or something. So when I think of like who needs to step up, I think there's like 2, classes, if you will. Like, there's a Zion Jamaree Salyer. Jamaree Salyer, in my opinion, needs to step up more in the sense that he's playing a whole new position. We have no clue. We think he's going to be a great guard. He should be a great guard. We haven't seen it in the NFL. If he isn't a great guard, things come off the rail pretty quick. So I think that's a need there. Then the other one, in my opinion, I'm torn between which one's more important. Jamaree Salyer and Isaiah Spiller, I think, are the 2, in my opinion, that need to step up the most. Ones that we did not see much last year in Isaiah Spiller. Jamaree Salyer, we saw in spurts, but let's say he takes over for Bryce Callahan full-time and becomes your starting slot corner. That's a huge role in today's NFL. And if he underwhelms as your starting slot corner, this story looks very different than it did a year ago. And then with Isaiah Spiller, again, we don't know what's happening with Austin Eckler. We don't know what's happening with the draft. But regardless, I think he's going to be important. And most likely he's going to be a part of the 3 running backs on this team. Austin Eckler gets traded, so they draft another running back, he's still on the team. Austin Eckler stays, they don't draft a running back, he's still on the team. They draft a running back and Austin Eckler stays, he's battling for probably running back 3 with Joshua Kelly. And I think he might win that. Who knows? But he needs to step up. And I like Isaiah Spiller. And I think his improvement will be key to this team's success, especially given who the new offensive coordinator is and how important the run game is to this new offense. Between those two, Jake, Isaiah Spiller and Jamaree Salyer, which one of those do you think is more important to the success of this team in 2023?
I mean, I think as it stands right now, because we don't know if Bryce Callahan is going to be returning to this team.
Yeah, there's variables on both sides for sure.
Right. And I would still expect the Chargers to address the secondary in some form or fashion. But do you really know if Jamaree Salyer is ready for that next step? I would say that one is probably more important because the Chargers have been a running back by committee, and however you want to slice it, I felt that Joshua Kelly actually put in the work last offseason and stepped up. And for whatever reason or another, held a pretty consistent grip of that running back 2 position. So, and again, I say this just from the standpoint of we really just don't know because we haven't seen enough of Isaiah Spiller yet. We would expect with his running style that he would be able to come in and make an impact. I would assume that if the season were to start today, that he would be slotted in as RB3. So I'm not really sure what to expect from him. And of course, this again weighs into the whole aspect of if Bijan Robinson ends up falling to the Chargers at 21 and the Chargers pounce on that, what does this make this running back stable look like now? And this is even with Austin Eckler on the team. Dan, remember when Matt Millen drafted 3 wide receivers in consecutive drafts? Remember when he did that when he was the Lions GM way back when?
Honestly, I don't, but I believe you.
You know, it's okay. I know I'm old as shit, and I probably just aged myself by even talking about that. But Tom Telesco is basically, pardon me.
Jake's got like a frog in his throat. He's muted. I'm going to put some sound on this. That way Jake can go. Woo, Jake, you made it. You're back. Ooh, I got nervous for a second.
What I was trying to say, lose you. Like that's how
got flustered,
disgusted what I was about to say has made me. Tom Telesco to me is the modern day Matt Millen, just trying to draft a running back that is going to be able to produce consistently for himself. Last 3 years, he's drafted running backs in every one of these drafts. Are you really going to draft number 4? Now, I'm not saying by any means that Bijan Robinson is not worth it. Bucks the trend of drafting a running back in the first round, no doubt about it. But Dan, at some point, you got to get this crap right. And there are so many, I guess, I don't want to say consequences because obviously a talent like Bijan Robinson and drafting him is not necessarily a bad thing. But again, for what the Chargers need, you're going to have to maneuver that now because running back isn't necessarily the biggest need that you have on this team. And if it's virtually a luxury. And if you choose to go a BPA route like that, what does that turn the rest of your draft into? So between the two, I would say as it relates to who has the better chance to get more playing reps in 2023 right now, today, I'd say it's going to be Jamaree Salyer.
I think you're right. And again, if we're being honest, the offensive run game in 2022 was garbage. And this team still was a playoff team. And aside from the horrific second half of the Jaguars playoff game, like they'd be in the second round. The defense, though, if they don't have that slot corner part figured out, like with who they have to go up against next year with their schedule, like that's tough. But okay. So then if you ask that same question between Jamaree Salyer and Jamaree Salyer, I think it's Salyer in a landslide.
Yeah. I don't think that there's any question about that. And again, you move Jamaree Salyer, who thankfully for his versatility coming out of Georgia, has played right guard before, played left guard, played left tackle, obviously last year. And everybody was expecting that you're going to have the 2 behemoths in Rashawn Slater and Jamaree Salyer be next to one another, which was it was a great thing to just sit and think about for a while. But
Jake's face was just like
it looks like the coaches have now made that decision that they're going to flip him over to the right side, which I think is good for being next to someone in Trey Pipkins and having Corey Linsley now on the immediate side of him. So, and again, from a draft value like that, for the fact that you were able to get him in the 6th round last year,
You have to have those kinds of things, though.
but see, these are some of the things that these are some of the situations that almost feel like is the saving grace for Tom Telesco when it comes
100%, 100%.
because we know his reputation in the 1st round hits on a majority of those picks. It's day 2 where people really get terrified. And he had his moment this past year, no doubt about it. But then it's like you get to the later rounds, and somehow or another in one of these picks, he's able to pull a rabbit out of his hat, find tremendous value, and then it ends up finding a guy who can actually be a fantastic rotational starter and is inserted on a whim at the left tackle spot to take over for one of the best in the league, performs extremely admirably, and ends up becoming your starting right guard the very next year. I mean, that's value. That's your scouting department working. That's your coaches understanding what to do properly. So for Jamaree Salyer, yes, if you're now comparing Jamaree Salyer to Jazeer Taylor, yeah, like you said, it's Jamaree Salyer in a damn landslide, because anything that relates to keeping Justin Herbert healthy and upright is going to be of the utmost importance.
Now, you switch over to the defensive line, which we know had its share of issues. let's just be vague and say issues last year, especially against the run. And given he was a rookie, Otito came on pretty strong after a while. And Brandon Staley, I think, was talking about how he was just getting his feet under him, and he was just kind of making that next kind of level step where things were starting to click. And then he goes down with an injury, and Cat's like, God dang it, we just were about to see the best of him. Now with his new rotation, interior defensive line, Austin Johnson coming back from injury, Otito coming back from injury, Sebastian Joseph Day coming back, and then you have Morgan Fox. Well, although there are 4 guys in that rotation currently, I think they're really depending on Otito. Because they could go interior defensive line this year in the draft. And if they do, I think I don't know if that's a good thing for Otito. I almost feel like they're at a place they don't have to, because they have 4 guys in that rotation, unless they were to do it day 3, maybe. But as a rotational piece for the defensive line, for what Brandon Staley wants to do with his defense, he's got to step up too. Now, is it as important as maybe a starting role like Jazeer Taylor possibly? Maybe not, but it's damn important. And we've seen what happens when we lose how many guys to injury or poor play or get let go last year on the defensive line. It was brutal. So Jamaree Salyer, Otito, you've got Isaiah Spiller, you got Jazeer Taylor. All 4 of those guys, I think, are going to have to contribute. And Jake, you've mentioned this in the past. It's incredible how teams like the Chiefs are able to hit on so many of their rookies that they select, and how vital that is when you have a contract like a Patrick Mahomes. The Chargers haven't gotten many of those, and they have a ton of top-end talent on this team that are taking up a boatload of money. They're not going to be able to keep that long-term when you have Justin Herbert about to get paid. And so guys like the ones we're talking about now on cheap relative contracts are going to be so important and are going to be vital to Tom Telesco being able to stay a GM for the Chargers. Because if they keep missing, they're going to keep failing when times get tough. And that's just simple math. They can't have it both ways. They can't have a $50 million quarterback and then pay $5 to $10 million for a whole bunch of guys when your rookie contracts are all busts. And I'm not saying they're all busts. I'm just saying that's the model you have to follow.
To a certain extent, yes, because unless the Chargers end up giving Justin Herbert a similar contract to what they gave to Patrick Mahomes, which seems completely unlikely, then you're not going to have that type of flexibility. Look, there is a reason why the Chiefs have won 7 straight AFC titles, because they are built top to bottom as an organization and personnel as one of the best in the entire league. And when we're talking about an organization, we're talking about ownership, GM, scouts, coaching. And they know, for the luxury of having a head coach like Andy Reid and a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, that you can let go of players and get high draft capital for it. You can trade back. I mean, what was it? Last year, the Chiefs still had 12 picks total, which gives them more flexibility to miss on draft picks if need be. Chargers don't have that luxury because they never end up having compensatory picks. None of their guys get signed elsewhere to big-time contracts for the most part. And the Chargers do not work the draft board value chart, essentially, or just the way that the board falls to them, specifically on day 2, very well. So,
AFC, and again, we're talking 7 straight AFC West titles.
Correct. Sorry. And 2 Super Bowls out of it.
And how many AFC Championship games? Like, come on.
Actually, I'm done counting. I don't want to talk about it.
That's so sad.
But let me flip it back to Tito for a second, because you were saying if the Chargers ended up addressing the defensive line, that it's a bad thing for him. And I don't fully agree with that. I think that the first thing that Jay Rodgers should be putting up when the Chargers end up returning back to camp is basically a sizzle reel of all the 40-yard rips that opposing offenses were going off against them. I would have to think that collectively between Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, Morgan Fox, Tito, that you got to spark some type of reaction to say, look, we were shit last year against the run. We have to do better. And I'm sure that they know that. But I do expect the Chargers to address the defensive line. And I don't think it's a bad thing for Tito, because Tito, his strong suit always has been, since coming out of UCLA, was as a run stuffer. So you're going to need that moving forward. And remember, you released Jerry Tillery last year. You lose Fehoko. You lose Joe Gaziano. You've already lost a lot of depth inside that interior defensive line room. So Tito becomes even more valuable, given the fact that his best trait is run stuffing, that you're going to need that moving forward. Now, as far as when the Chargers could possibly address the interior defensive line position, I think there's maybe one exception that you would do that in the first round. Highly unlikely. Maybe even a couple players in the second round. I really don't see them addressing that need until maybe starting in the third, if anything. But I think Tito's position is safe. I think the coaching staff values him a lot.
I agree.
And Dan, we cannot get out of here, obviously, without taking a deeper dive into the Chargers' 3rd round pick of last year in JT Woods. So I think the main reason, outside of him having blazing speed last year, this was one of those moves by Tom Telesco to kind of get 1 year ahead of the game. I think that they knew that they were not going to be bringing Nasir Adderley back the following year. And we all kind of said that. It's like, okay, that's the move, to kind of just get ahead of things and have JT Woods develop a little bit. Unfortunately, from a tackling perspective, there was a lot of work to do for JT Woods. And it doesn't, I don't even know how you could slot him in as possibly being in contention for the starting spot this year based on what he performed as. Alohi Gilman, as of right now, has that role. But do you...
And then if you get John Johnson, he's definitely not.
Right. We haven't even talked about that. Or the Chargers could address the safety position in the draft. Who knows? So, again, if we're looking at this from a step-up standpoint, are you telling me right now that you just spent a 3rd round pick on a guy who's just going to contribute for you next year on special teams?
I mean, so I go back to, like, personally, for his career, does he need to step up?
Sure.
Absolutely.
100%.
For this Chargers team, I don't necessarily know if it's as vital this year for him to step up, given who's on the roster, possibly drafting, possible John Johnson, like a whole bunch of different options. But like, he seems kind of similar to the Trey Pipkins type of pick, when like they saw it as a project type. They saw the traits, they saw the production, they know it's going to take development. Now, do you do that in round 3? It's a whole different discussion. I'm saying, like, that's what it looks like. You sure hope they're right. I mean, look, the guy was productive. I think he had the most interceptions at Baylor that year. Blazing speed, like super athletic. Like, you see it there. I think it's between the ears. He's got to figure out instincts. I think it's the part that is the biggest downfall to him right now. And I think that goes along with tackling because he kind of gets out of position. Deane Leanard, though, I mean, look, he and Jamaree Salyer both were pretty stellar special teamers. And that's usually how rookies kind of make their pay early on, especially late drafts. So I guess what we're saying is, like, this second year season for these guys, more of them than not need to step up. How confident are you in that?
It's hard, Dan, because literally you go through this list and 3 guys at most are the ones that really saw the most play time. That's between Zion Johnson, Jamaree Salyer, Tito. They were the ones that made the most impact. And you could say Zander Horvath for just the fact, like, okay, he's the only fullback on the roster. He played those starting. That's fine. And yeah, he'll still need to improve. But as far as what we saw and what was still remaining for what you expected that they were going to be coming in last year, and to not necessarily have that pan out for you, Dan, there's a damn good reason why Charger fans hold their collective breath when the Chargers are on the clock in the 3rd round. Dan, let me read this off to you real quick, just in case anybody forgot. JT Woods in the 3rd. Year before that, it was Josh Palmer, Trey McKitty. I think one of those was a good selection. One. The year before that, Chargers didn't have a 3rd pick. Why? Because they packaged their 2nd and their 3rd rounders to move up, to trade up to get Kenneth Murray. So you didn't pick until the 4th round that year. The year before that is when you selected Trey Pipkins. The year before that was Justin Jones. The year before that was Dan Feeney, which at the time, when you had Forrest Lamp and Dan Feeney back-to-back picks, at the time that sounded good. But that didn't end up panning out for you either.
So what you're saying is
the impact players that the Chargers have been able to secure in the 3rd round have yielded very, very little results. And picking in the 3rd round, you should still be able to find starting contributors year 1 for yourself.
Those are top 100 players.
So you got to buck this trend, man. You really do. You have to figure this out. And look, the one time that the Chargers had 2 picks in the 3rd round, at least they got looks like they, at least for now, it looks like they got 1 right.
But that's why you want to have more at-bats. You can get stack picks, more opportunity to hit on selections. Yeah. Which is why Jake has been clamoring for 20 years now for the Chargers to trade down. Jake, clearly it's going to be interesting to see how important or how much these guys contribute in year 2. So of the guys we talked about, let's do top 2. Who will contribute the most?
Who will and who should?
Who will, and take out Zion Johnson. Because I think, like, he's moving to the other side, but he's still playing his position. Who will? Today,
before the draft, without knowing anything, I would say that it would have to be Jamaree Salyer and Tito.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any argument around that.
I'm more confident in Tito than I am Jamaree Salyer stepping in full time for the slot corner. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's those 2. This is why the draft is so important. And we are 14 days away from the Chargers 2023 selections beginning.
Now, Dan, let me ask this question. now that we just recapped this, considering what the Chargers did last year in the draft, does that make you feel?
I knew you're gonna
Does
rain
that
on
make
my
you
parade.
feel-
I was all excited about this draft. Now I'm like,
No, hang on. I'm not even done. Does that make you
I know where you're
feel?
going.
Does that make you feel better or a clearer picture as far as what the Chargers need to do? Like, and even if you factor in all of the restructures of the contract and the all-in mentality, does this feel like the Chargers have now backed themselves into a corner where they know that they have to draft well? Like, I mean, that's obviously known to everybody. It's like, you really need to hit this draft out of the park for a multitude of different reasons. But does it make you feel better about the situation? Or does it make you feel a little bit more nervous?
Hey, I gotta apologize. I thought you were gonna say, does that make you feel good about this draft knowing how bad they were last year? I thought that's where you were going.
I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, that is kind of in there. That is kind of in there a little bit.
I think like the way that the Chargers team is set up now, I think they're pretty flexible with how they can draft and the philosophy in which they should draft. I.e., like they literally could probably go one of 4 or 5 positions in rounds 1 and 2.
Yep, because you're not necessarily looking for top end starters at any of these positions. It's probably some that could develop into that down the line, sure. But wherever if the wide receiver is drafted, whenever he's drafted, it's coming in as wide receiver 3 or 4 to start. Edge player would be obviously coming in as edge 3. Defensive line, interior rotation, whatever you want to call it. None of these guys, I think, would end up being starters from this year. But moving forward, you would hope that they would be able to develop into that. But the biggest thing that the Chargers obviously has affected them over the last several years has been depth and talent.
Yeah, they've missed on day 2 and 3 more than they've hit.
Yes.
In terms of long-term success of these players.
Correct.
Now, Jacob, let's put this out there. You know who would love to see Bijan Robinson? The Dallas Cowboys. Do I think he falls that far? No. But do I see them possibly trading up if he falls to, let's say, 21? That would be ideal for me. Let the Chargers trade back, add an additional second and third, whatever pick you tell me. Go back to 28.
They picked 26, so
trade back 5 spots.
I'm not sure that nets you a second round pick. I think definitely a third. It probably would get you.
If it's for Bijan Robinson, I think you might be able to get it.
I mean, I may be wrong. 5 spots, and we're not talking in the top 10 or anything like that. If we're measuring,
maybe a third and a fourth is probably what it's more likely if you were to be able to do it. But yeah, I would do it. Okay, would you do that, or would you rather pick Bijan? Let's say a third and a fourth.
Daniel Popper talked about this in his latest article when he did his mock draft, which he had the Chargers selecting Bijan Robinson, which I understand every reason in the book why the Chargers would go that route. But there is a flip side of that. Because of the fact that it technically running back as it stands right now, expecting Austin Eckler to be back with this team, it is more of a luxury pick. And if you did that, you're now having to take those needs in a first round position that you had coming into this year that you will now have to address with different talent in round 2 and round 3 and round 4. It's going to push those priorities down a little bit, and the talent pool is not going to be as good depending on which order you draft them in. So if the Chargers did that, Dan, I'd have to say that they would have to execute a trade back on day 2, because I would feel a hell of a lot better if you got Bijan and you had one extra pick on day 2 or even day 3 to do that.
Would you rather have them pick Bijan at 21 or trade back, let's say, for a third and a fourth?
It's tough, man. I think that Bijan would be like the one exception where it's like if he was on the board and they didn't trade back, you would understand it. You would understand it. So he would be like the one player exception considering the type of value that you're getting, really. as far as arguably the best offensive player in this.
But
entire
imagine
class.
if you can. Let's just say instead of him, you get. I'm making up a name. Let's say I don't know. Michael Mayer's gone. Let's say Kincaid's gone. Let's say you go Darnell Washington, and then you get 2 more top 110 players. So let's just say you can then pick a Marvin Mims type. So this is an additional player that you're now having on your team, a Marvin Mims type. And let's say you can get like I don't know. Just say you can get like you can go Corey Trice for a corner. You can go like a Derek Hall type. Like, I'm not saying 1 for 1. These guys are as going to be as good as Bijan. I'm not saying that at all. But 3 for 1? Like, that's where it gets tough. Jake, the draft is important. The draft is also in 14 days. Can't wait. What's going to be our first drink of choice while we're there?
It's going to be a plethora of libations to choose from, my friend. You know I always stock up on the bourbon whiskey.
Yep.
We may even have a beer sponsor for it. We're still trying to lock that down, which would be awesome. But there definitely is going to be beer there of the Corona and the Modelo variety. That is damn sure.
I'm probably going to start with one of those. I'm probably going to start with a Corona.
You know, you start...
Dos Equis Amber, maybe.
Start easy. You get a little bit of a warm-up. I guarantee you, when it gets closer to the Chargers pick, I probably will be switching from beer to hard liquor at that point in time, because the adrenaline will be going, the nerves will start to be hitting, the thought process of Tom Telesco, are you really going to do this again type of situation.
Can't freaking wait.
Yeah.
Let's go. All right, Jake, let's get out of here. I think folks are done listening to our stupid voices for the day. Go get to the giveaway. Enter for your chance to win the jersey. Subscribe, like, do all the fun things. Guys, gals, pets, good afternoon, good evening, good night. For Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.